The pipes under the kitchen island had been leaking for 3 days before anyone called me. That's how I knew it was bad. Not the call itself, but the fact that they'd waited that long. By the time I pulled up to the building, the address alone made me slow down. Glass tower on the waterfront in Vancouver's Coal Harbour. The kind where the lobby has a concierge and the parking spots cost more per month than most people's rent. I grabbed my bag, checked in with the front desk, and took the elevator to the 14th floor. The unit door was already open when I got there. A woman in her mid-30s was standing at the kitchen counter with her phone to her ear, pointing toward the cabinet under the island without looking at me. Whatever conversation she was having, it was not going well. She held up one finger in my direction, "Give me a minute," and kept talking. I crouched down, opened the cabinet, and understood immediately why nobody had tried to fix it themselves. The supply line fitting had corroded where it met the shutoff valve. Not a quick patch job, a full replacement, minimum 2 hours. She ended the call and crouched down beside me without being asked. "How bad?" "Manageable, not a disaster yet." She studied the cabinet like she was reading a report. "The building sent someone yesterday. He said it needed a full repipe. He was wrong." She looked at me sideways. Not skeptical, more like she was filing the information away. "You sound sure." I am." She stood back up. "Good, because I have a dinner in this kitchen on Friday, and I'd rather not be explaining the plywood situation to 12 people. I almost smiled at that. "I'll have it done before Friday." Her name was Vivienne. I found that out later, not because she introduced herself, but because someone called her office line while I was still under the cabinet, and whoever was on the other end said it like they'd been saying it all their lives. "Vivienne, we need your sign-off by 3. She answered in that same measured tone she'd used with me. Clear, fast, no room for interruption. I finished the assessment, gave her the quote on the spot, and she approved it before I'd finished the sentence. No negotiating, no calling someone else to check. She just said, "When can you start?" "Now if you want." "Then start." That was the whole conversation. I worked for almost 2.5 hours. She moved through the apartment the whole time, sometimes on calls in another room, sometimes at her desk near the window, with a view of the inlet that I tried not to look at directly, because I knew if I started looking at it, I'd lose 20 minutes. She brought me a glass of water at some point, and left it on the counter without a word. That was it. When I finished, she came to check the cabinet herself, opened it, looked at the fitting, ran the tap and watched underneath. No drip, no seep, nothing. She closed the cabinet and turned to me. The building's plumber would have charged me twice this and taken a week. Probably. I'll use your number going forward. I wrote up the invoice on my phone, sent it to the email she gave me, and was gone inside 10 minutes. Normal job. Good client. I didn't think much about it on the drive home. I thought about it more than I should have the next morning. Not for any dramatic reason. There was just something about the way she operated that stuck with me. No performance. No small talk to fill the space. She'd treated me like someone who knew what they were doing, which sounds like it should be the baseline. But in this work, it's rarer than it has any right to be. Most people in units like that either hover the whole time or disappear, and leave you wondering if you're supposed to announce yourself every time you move to a different room. She didn't either. She just let me work. I told myself that was the whole of it. Someone who treated tradespeople with basic respect. Not uncommon enough to deserve this much thought. I moved on to the next job, and the one after that, and after 4 days the invoice came back paid, with a short note attached. Efficient and thorough. Thank you, Vivienne. I saved the contact. 3 weeks later, she called on a Tuesday morning, while I was parked outside a job in Kitsilano, eating a sandwich I didn't really want. The building's main water shutoff had been tested that morning, and now the cold water pressure in her unit was inconsistent. Could I come by that afternoon? He stared at the message. Pressure inconsistency after a shutoff test was almost always a debris issue in the line. 20-minute fix, maybe 30. I texted back that I could be there after 2. When I arrived, she opened the door in different clothes than I expected. Not the blazer and phone version of her I'd catalogued. She was in dark trousers and a loose cream sweater with the sleeves pushed up. Her hair was down. She looked like a different variable of the same person, and I noticed it before I could not notice it. The pressure's better in the bathroom, she said. Worse in the kitchen. I don't know if that matters. It does. Thank you. He stepped back to let me in. Coffee? I hesitated for exactly half a second. Sure. That was new. Last time she'd left water and said nothing. This time she made the coffee herself. Black, in a proper mug, not a pod thing, and set it on the counter near where I was working. When I cleared the partial debris blockage from the aerator and the pressure evened out, she was still in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with her own mug, watching the tap run. That fast? Debris in the aerator. Common after they mess with the main line. The building maintenance said it might be a pressure regulator issue. I looked at her. The building maintenance is having a bad month. She laughed. A real one, quick and unguarded. It changed her face in a way I wasn't ready for. She asked if I had another job after this. I said I had a window estimate at 4, but nothing before that. She said she'd just gotten off a 3-hour call with a contractor in Toronto and hadn't eaten, and was making eggs whether I stayed or not. She said it the way someone states a fact about the weather. Completely matter of fact. Like the logical follow-through was obvious. I stayed. The kitchen was the kind of place that had every tool, and none of the mess that means someone actually cooks. She moved around it carefully, like she was still learning its layout, even though she'd clearly lived there for a while. She made scrambled eggs with some leftover roasted vegetables from a container in the fridge, and apologized twice for the simplicity of it. Both times I told her to stop apologizing. It's a reflex, she said. Bad one. She looked up. I know. We ate at the island. She asked about the work. Not politely, but genuinely, the way someone asks when they actually want to know the answer. How long I'd been independent. Whether I worked mostly residential or commercial. Whether I'd always been based in Vancouver or moved here for something. I answered all of it without thinking too hard, which was unusual for me. I'm not a chatty person at jobs. Never have been. But this didn't feel like the job anymore. Even though I was still technically on the clock. I asked her what she did. She said she ran a mid-sized development consultancy, projects across Western Canada, some in Alberta and up in the territories. I asked if she worked from home or had an office. She said both, but mostly here, which was why the apartment mattered to her in a way it maybe wouldn't to someone else. It's not decorative, she said. It's functional. If this place doesn't work, nothing else works. It's how I think about the van. She tilted her head slightly. Your van. My whole operation is in that van. If it breaks down, I'm done for the day. Everything I need is in there. She considered that. I've never thought about that. The way tradespeople carry their entire business around with them. And most people don't. It must be either very freeing or very stressful. Both, I said, depending on the day. She smiled at that. And I found myself watching the way it started at the corners and took a moment to reach the rest of her face. Like she had to decide each time whether to let it happen. I left before 4. She stood at the door for a moment after she opened it, not rushing me out, not drawing it out either. Just steady. I'll use you for the next thing, she said. You said that last time. And here we are. I walked to the elevator and didn't look back, which took more effort than I expected. After that, the calls came in a pattern that was too regular to be coincidental. A sticky shutoff under the bathroom vanity. A slow drain in the laundry closet that turned out to be a sock. Her words, not mine, delivered completely deadpan. A water heater that was making a sound she described over the phone as rhythmic and threatening. Every time I came. Every time it was fixable. Every time she seemed mildly interested in the fix itself and more interested in the conversation. I started to notice things I had no business noticing. The way she kept a single framed photo on the bookshelf near her desk, turned slightly away from the room, like she'd angled it for herself and not for visitors. The way she made tea instead of coffee in the late afternoon, and held the mug with both hands. The way she always knew exactly where everything was in the apartment, but sometimes stood in the middle of a room, like she'd forgotten why she walked in. One afternoon she led me down the back hall to check the pressure on a secondary line near the storage closet. The closet door was open. Inside, behind a set of labeled boxes and a folded stepladder, there was a row of stretched canvases leaning against the wall. Not framed, not displayed. Just stacked there like they were waiting for a decision. The top one was mostly abstract, but had a coastline in it. Dark water, pale sky. Something that looked like it had been painted from memory rather than reference. You paint, I said. She looked at the closet like she'd forgotten the door was open. Sometimes. I looked at the stack. There were at least a dozen pieces in there. That's more than sometimes. She closed the closet door without answering, and I let it go. But I thought about it for the rest of the afternoon. A week later, she asked if I'd want to grab food after a job I was already doing nearby. Not at her place. Somewhere outside, a spot she liked down on the seawall near Olympic Village. I said yes before I finished reading the message. It was early October, and the air off False Creek had that clean cold edge that Vancouver gets when the summer finally lets go for real. We sat outside at a place that did good fish tacos and bad wine, which she pointed out immediately, and then ordered anyway. She was different out here. More relaxed in the way people sometimes are when they're not in their own space and don't have to manage it. She asked me where I grew up. I said Kamloops, moved to Vancouver for an apprenticeship at 22, and never went back for more than a long weekend. She asked if I missed it. I said not the town, but certain things. The size of the sky, the way you could drive 15 minutes and be completely alone. She nodded slowly. I grew up outside Halifax. I miss the water, but not the same water. Atlantic's different. It doesn't forgive anything, she said. The Pacific at least pretends. That made me laugh. A real one. And she looked pleased in a quiet way, like she'd been aiming for exactly that. Later, when the wind picked up, and we both stopped pretending we weren't cold, she wrapped her hands around her paper cup and looked out at the boats. Can I ask you something personal? Sure. You actually like this work? Or is it just what you're good at? I thought about it. Both. But not equally. Some jobs I leave and feel like I did something real. Other jobs I leave and could not describe the apartment to you 20 minutes later. Which kind is this? She asked, and I could tell she didn't mean plumbing. I looked at her. You know the answer. She looked back at the water. A long moment passed, the kind where something shifts without anyone touching it. I have a reputation for being difficult, she said finally. You're not difficult. You've been in my apartment 4 times. I mean in the way people usually mean it. He turned toward me. How do people usually mean it? Demanding, hard to read, not worth the effort. Her jaw tightened just slightly. People say that when they can't get what they want quickly enough. I know, I said. He studied my face for a moment. You actually know. Yeah. The wind came in harder then, and we both gave up on the patio at the same time. We walked back along the seawall in that easy way, where nobody feels the need to fill the quiet, and when we reached the point where her direction and mine separated, she stopped and looked at me like she was deciding something. I have a small thing at the gallery next week, a friend's opening. It's not a big deal. She paused. I'd like it if you came. I looked down at my boots. Work blundstones scuffed along the toe. Vivienne. Dear, don't. I'm not built for. Stop. She said it quietly, but the word landed flat and final. I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to hear it. I have spent the last several years in rooms full of people who know exactly what to say and mean none of it. I am not inviting you there as an accessory, or a story, or a curiosity. I am inviting you because I have spent the last 2 months looking forward to every single time my phone shows your name, and I am tired of pretending that's a small thing. The seawall was quiet around us. A cyclist went past on the path, and then it was just the water and the city behind her. That's not a small thing, I said. No, she said, it isn't. I went to the gallery. The first 15 minutes were hard in exactly the way I expected. Too much deliberate casualness from people who weren't casual at all, too many conversations happening on 2 levels at the same time. A man in a very considered jacket asked me how I knew Vivienne, with a smile that had an agenda behind it. She appeared at my shoulder before I could answer. He's with me, she said simply, and moved us toward the work on the wall, like she hadn't just ended a conversation with 4 words. I stayed close to her for the rest of the evening without being asked. She introduced me to 2 people she actually liked and steered us away from everyone else with the efficiency of someone who had mapped every exit before walking in. On the way home, standing outside while she waited for her car, she said, "Thank you for coming. I survived. You did more than survive. She looked up at me. You made it better. I didn't know what to do with that, so I said nothing. Her car arrived and she stopped before getting in. Come over tomorrow, she said. No agenda. Just come over. Here, I did. That Sunday was the one that changed things. Not because anything dramatic happened. Because nothing did, and it still mattered. She painted for most of the afternoon in the spare bedroom she'd converted into a studio. Not the closet stash, a proper space I hadn't seen yet, with north-facing light and a drop cloth on the floor, and half-finished work on a standing easel. She'd shown me in without ceremony, the way she'd done with the closet, except this time the door stayed open. I sat on the floor near the window with a coffee she'd made me, watching the light change over the water, through the glass and listening to her work. She didn't talk much, didn't seem to need anything from me. And that was the thing. The whole apartment felt different, when it wasn't about a problem being fixed, quieter, more itself. At some point she put the brush down and sat on the floor across from me, back against the wall, and we talked for a long time about nothing consecutive. Her family in Nova Scotia, my parents in Kamloops, whether Vancouver was actually home or just where we'd landed. She told me about a project in Yellowknife that had gone badly, a contractor dispute that cost her a year and the kind of professional credibility loss that follows you around even after you've rebuilt. She told me like it was just data, but I could hear what it had cost her to decide to trust people with her name on the line. You never told anyone that before, I said. She looked at me. No. Why me? She was quiet for a moment. Because you don't need anything from me. She paused. Everyone in my life either works for me or wants something I can give them. You show up, do your job, charge a fair rate, and leave. The first time I didn't have a problem to call you about. I didn't know if you'd even come. I came. I know. Something moved in her face then. Not emotion exactly, more like recognition. I told her the truth. That I'd been thinking about her since the first job. That I'd saved her contact the same night and looked at it more than made sense before she called again. That the Tuesday call about the pressure issue had made me unreasonably relieved for a reason I hadn't fully admitted to myself at the time. He listened to all of it without interrupting. I was nervous you wouldn't come back, she said when I finished. After the aerator job. I sat with the coffee cups after you left and thought, that's probably that. And the laundry drain? She smiled. The sock was real, but I could have called the building. I laughed and she laughed, and for a while, the whole apartment felt lighter than I'd ever experienced it. But the lightness didn't stay. Over the next few weeks, the doubt came in the way it does when something starts to feel real, and your brain starts writing the version that ends badly. I'd leave her building and drive home and sit in the van in my parking spot, looking up at my building, which was a 30-year-old mid-rise in Mount Pleasant, and try to figure out what I was doing. She had a consultancy. She flew to Calgary on a Tuesday and was back by Thursday. He had a friend group that held gallery openings and sat on boards and talked about development timelines, like other people talk about the weekend. And I had a van, a unit in a building where the elevator had been broken for a month, and a savings account that was good but not that kind of good. One evening she could tell. We were in the kitchen and she was making tea, and I was watching her and not really being present, and she put the kettle down and turned around. Tell me what's happening in your head. I tried to say nothing was. She waited me out with the specific patience of someone who has sat across from too many people not saying what they mean. So I said it, that I kept waiting for the moment she'd look around and calculate what this actually was. That her world had a certain shape and I was not that shape. That I cared about her more than I'd planned to, and that caring had made me aware of every way this could go wrong. She didn't speak for a long moment. Then she said, turn around. Turned. Through the floor-to-ceiling window, the whole inlet was laid out in the dark. Lights across the north shore reflected in the water. The mountains just visible as darker shapes against the sky. I have stood at that window 100 times, she said, and not felt anything except mildly pleased that I'd made a good investment. I turned back to her. 3 weeks ago, I was standing there at 7 in the morning and I thought, I want to tell him about the osprey I just saw. That was it. That was when I knew. She looked at me steadily. Not a purchase. Not a project. You are the first person in this building that this apartment has ever actually belonged to alongside me. I had nothing to say to that. Nothing that would have been adequate. He crossed the kitchen and stood in front of me, and I could see how tired she was. Not the performance tired of busy people. The real kind. The underneath kind. I don't need you to match me, she said. I need you to stay. I put my hands on her face, and she closed her eyes and leaned into it like she'd been waiting all day for someone to do that, without wanting something back. We were fine after that. Not perfect. Real doesn't work like that, but fine in the way that matters, the way that makes small mornings feel like enough. Then came a Tuesday in November. She'd been quiet for a few days. Professional kind of quiet, occupied, not withdrawn. A big file had come through, something in the interior that needed a decision fast. I'd given her space because she didn't ask for much, and when she did it was worth paying attention to. He texted me that evening. Can you come tonight? Nothing urgent. I just want you here. Drove over. When she opened the door, she had her coat on, and her keys in her hand. Him, outside with me first. We took the elevator to the parkade, and she walked me to a corner spot near the exit. Parked there, under the fluorescent light, was a truck that stopped me where I stood. A 1972 GMC Sierra Restomod. Classic body, everything underneath updated. Two-tone, dark green over cream, chrome details clean and proportional. The kind of truck that people spend years looking for and more years finding a shop they trust to touch it. I stood there for a long time. You mentioned it in September, she said behind me. The truck you saw in Gastown. You said you'd been looking for one like that for years. Vivienne. More. There's more. She held out a folder. Inside was a lease agreement for a commercial unit in East Van. Ground floor, corner spot, bay door access, good ceiling height. Already permitted for light mechanical and restoration work. I had to sit down. There was nowhere to sit, so I leaned against the truck and read the pages twice. The lease is prepaid for the first 2 years, she said. The truck is yours outright. The equipment list is in the back pocket. I had someone put together what you'd need to start. You can't do this. Eat her. I've done it. That's not. She stepped closer. Look at me. Here, I looked up. I am not giving you things to keep you. I know how that would feel, and I would never do that to you. She said it clearly, with no performance in it. I am giving you these things because you told me about that workshop, like it was someone else's dream. Like it was a thing that happened to other people, and I have spent enough of my life watching good things not happen because nobody moved first. Her voice stayed level, but her eyes didn't. I moved first. Because this is real to me. Because you are real to me. And because I am so tired of waiting for the right moment, when the right moment is just the one where you decide. The car passed somewhere up on the street. The parkade hummed. I looked at the truck. I looked at the folder. I looked at her. You could have just said that without the truck, I said. I know, she said. But I wanted you to have something with an address. Something that couldn't be taken back. Here. I stood up and she didn't move away, and the folder was bent where I'd been holding it too tight. And neither of us said anything for a moment because there wasn't anything left to say that we hadn't already said with everything else. I pulled her in, and she came without hesitation, her forehead against my shoulder, and for the first time since September, I stopped doing the math. Stopped calculating what fit and what didn't, and who belonged where. She had given me a workshop and a truck. She had told me I was the first person the apartment had ever belonged to, alongside her. She had said she was tired of waiting for the right moment, and that I was real to her. I had no more arguments left. Behind us, the keys to the Sierra were still in my hand, the metal warm from being held, and ahead of me was a corner unit in East Van with a bay door and a good ceiling, and somewhere in between was a person who had been waiting since September for me to stop leaving before I left. I wasn't going to do that anymore. I used to think the gap between two people's lives was measured in money. Square footage, the kind of car in the driveway, whether your building's elevator works. I spent a long time doing that math and always coming up short, which meant I spent a long time standing in rooms where I belonged and convincing myself I didn't. What changed wasn't Vivienne giving me the truck or the workshop lease. Those things mattered, but that's not what shifted something in me. What shifted was earlier, in her kitchen, when she said she'd seen an osprey at 7 in the morning, and her first thought was that she wanted to tell me. That's such a small thing. And it was the whole thing. I think about the version of myself that would have walked away after the editor job. Polite, professional, gone. That version had a logic to it. Don't complicate work. Don't reach across a distance that wasn't yours to cross. And that logic was cowardice dressed up as practicality. I know that now. Real integrity isn't just about not doing the wrong thing. It's about having the honesty to name what's actually happening inside you, even when naming it is the harder choice. Joel, you're not being careful. You're hiding. That took me longer to say to myself than it should have. Vivian was doing her own version of the same thing. She had built a life that functioned beautifully from the outside and felt like a hotel nobody had checked into. She was sharp enough to know exactly what was missing, and disciplined enough to have kept going without it. That kind of intelligence. The kind that sees clearly and still keeps doing the work. I have a lot of respect for that. But seeing clearly and actually moving are two different things. She moved first. She called when the pressure was fine. She invited me to the gallery when she didn't have to. She came back from that parking lot with a folder and keys and said, "I am tired of waiting for the right moment." That took something real. Not just confidence, courage. The kind that knows the other person might still say no and decides to try anyway. The workshop isn't open yet. We're still doing permits, still figuring out the equipment layout. Some evenings I drive over to the unit in East Van just to stand in it with the lights on. It smells like old brick and metal and something that might become mine. The Sierra is in the parking spot at my building, and every time I walk past it I have to stop for a second. Not because of what it is, but because of what it means. Someone listened when I talked. Deeper. Someone took what I said seriously enough to build an answer to it. I don't think we get those moments handed to us often. I think most of the time we talk ourselves out of them before they can become anything. I almost did, and the only reason I didn't is because I finally got tired of leaving before I left. Tired enough to stay still and find out what happened next. What happened next was the best thing in my life so far.